Fawlty Towers has just come out in paperback, and Mr. Cleese is here to talk about it. The thing that seems to me to drive Fawlty Towers is the quite incredible bad temper of Basil.
Mm.
When did you stumble on that, and where did that come from?
Well, I think the idea was sparked off when we were actually staying in a hotel when we were filming for Monty Python. We were staying in this hotel in TORQUAY, and this guy behind the desk, who's now fortunately gone to Canada, so relieved certain legal problems, fascinated me just because the guests were a nuisance. And when Connie and I wanted to write something about 5 years later, we sat down one morning, and by about 11:30 we knew we were going to write about this hotel, because she'd also come down later on and stayed at it. And then as we got to write it, we got to find this character terribly, terribly funny. And I think because there's a lot of me in him, certainly. I mean, it's a boring thing to say, but it's actually true. And I think there's a certain amount of Connie, that sort of feeling when there are just too many demands, and you start getting very, very tight inside and very, very resentful of everything that happened, and you are hooked by something, and that kind of mood takes over. And we're rather cruel to Basil, because we put him in terrible situations and deliberately things go wrong so that the pressures on him increase and increase and increase.
Did you actually invent Manuel in order to bring out yet another aspect of Basil's fury?
I don't know. I mean, Connie and I have always been aware that if you go into a restaurant in London now, you're really quite lucky to get what you ordered. And this seems to be sort of universally accepted, you know. It's, some restaurants it's 60-40, others it's 40-60. And also I found that the business of non-communication, I mean, the first thing that I think ever made me cry with laughter after Tommy Cooper was when I heard Stanley Unwin on the radio, and I've always found that non-communication terribly funny.
Mike Brearley.
Yes, well, I enjoyed it very much, largely as a reminder of seeing the series. And I suppose there are a few people this side of Mongolia who haven't actually seen Fawlty Towers. Is the book designed? Do you think the book will appeal to them? I mean, are you selling it?
I don't know. I don't know, because obviously when I look at the lines now, I can hear the inflections. I know exactly how they're set. Yeah. But actually, the reason that I thought of putting it into a book was that about 4 years ago, I bought a book called A Flask of Fields, which is the best sequences from various W.C. Fields films. And it had me laughing out loud in bed in a way that the printed page never does.
Because you've actually reprinted it. Well, it is very much like it's a television script, isn't it?
It is the television script, yeah.
It's not written up as a novel or anything like that. It's written as a television script with photographs.
That's right. And I was tempted to actually, Connie and I are terrible about putting stage directions in because we're in it anyway, so we don't have to say archly or, you know, he crosses to the kitchen, because in any case John Howard Davis will think of a better move when we actually come to do the programme. But as a result, I had to sort of update the stage directions and change them, but I left it as plain as possible.
Elaine Feinstein.
Well, I find Basil, for all his evil temper, totally lovable and forgivable, and in spite of his snobberies and so on, because he's always in such a mess. I mean, you just can't do other than sympathise with him and identify with him. But Sybil's a different matter. I wonder, as you came to be writing the script, whether perhaps there grew in you what grew in me as I read the script here. That is, a sort of growing loathing for her efficiency and her role as a linchpin.
Really?
Yes. She seemed to me to be so good at coping with everything that I couldn't quite forgive her some of her attitudes the way I totally forgive Basil.
I see what you mean, because Basil, in other words, is you can sympathise with him and even like him, provided he stays the other side of a screen, because he's out of control and there's nothing he can do, whereas Sybil is in control.
Yes.
Sort of why you can like Basil and not like Nixon, perhaps. It occurred to me earlier.
That may be true.
But, no, I mean, I see the two of them kind of locked. I mean, she copes with it better because she's a bit more ruthless. But I see them kind of locked together, and one is the other is the face of the other, you know. And they're in one of those sort of negative relationships. I remember reading a book on transactional analysis once, and they said that kind of relationship when the man says, "Is there a clean shirt?" She says, "Have you cleaned the garage yet?" You see what I mean? They're completely locked into this negative form of behaviour to each other, and they can't escape. And some people find it too bitter, but...
No.
Freddie.
No, my question is very much the same as Mike's. It seems to me that Fields' humour was more verbal, this is more visual, And I thought this was mainly intended, and I think we certainly will succeed, as a form of appealing to nostalgia. I mean, reminding people who've seen and enjoyed the show of what it was like. How much it would mean to someone who hadn't, in fact, ever seen it, I don't know. As I'm not in that class, I can't say. But
I couldn't guess myself, but I know that there are some sequences here which I think, in fact, work better when you can read them, because, of course, we have the studio audience,
yes.
which is marvellous in some ways, but awful in others. And there's a moment here, for example, where I'm putting a custard pie in somebody's face, and I'd forgotten that the Major actually comes up while I'm putting the custard pie in Bernard Cribbin's face and says, "Papers arrived yet, Fawlty?" You know, and I say, "Not yet, Major," you know, and pour cream in his briefcase, which is kind of funny, isn't completely lost on the television. And there are certain sections which I think work better because you can actually pick the lines out and enjoy some of the lines without being distracted.
Independently of the visualization, you think?
I think that you have to have some sort of picture of the general situation, and I try to choose the pictures not just to illustrate a particular line as well as possible, but to give the reader a vague mental image of where we are at any given moment. There's about 2 to 3 on each page. You know,
It's in
so you
fact
have
a
a sort of
development
picture.
of the comic strip. The
Yeah,
pictures are
yeah,
a development
that's
of comic
right,
strip
yeah.
notion, aren't they? And I think they work well. I think what we're saying is, and to reverse what we're saying, is that having seen it on television, it is now so powerful that for the moment we can't read it except in the voices of...
I have to confess, I did twice laugh aloud reading a piece that I hadn't actually seen.
Oh, good. Good.
Yes, and there are some stage directions. You get advantage from that, like Basil paused to review his sense data.
His sense data, yeah.
You can't quite get that across on the...
I was very pleased. I noticed it was hyphenated, so I ran to, the Foundations of Empirical Knowledge and discovered there should be a hyphen in it, which is quite a relief when I found you on the programme.
Given that you work so closely together, yourself and Connie Booth, do you actually write it down and go into the rehearsal room with it, or is a lot, having written it down, is a lot more invented as you're working it through?
I'd say most of it is in our heads, and about 70% of that on the paper by the time we go into rehearsal. John Howard Davis always comes up with better moves, which, although they then destroy the spatial relationships we had in our minds when we were writing the characters, somehow we immediately adapt to them, and a day later we've forgotten what was in our minds. And of course you've got people like Prunella and Andrew feeding ideas in. But I think a very high percentage of it's already in our minds, and it's lovely to be in it, you know, because otherwise, if you're a writer, it's so difficult. I mean, wasn't it Samuel Beckett who started saying you take a pause of 6 and you take a pause of 7, you know? When you hear the line and you know how it should be said, it must be awful being a writer and not being able to be there and say, no, sorry, but...
Yes.
Well, there we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you.